Thank you, Professor Sonam Shiring. My name is Suresh Nanwani. My thanks to the organizers for this groundbreaking event. I will cover 5 topics in my presentation. The introduction, ethics, compliance, transparency, and I end with moving forward, possible directions. So what I'd like to do is skip through some slides, but at the same time for each specific point, I will highlight the various aspects that I just want to highlight, bullet points as takeaways. I think that's the best way to remember them. So you don't have to necessarily look at the slides all the time, just figure out what it is that I'm looking at or I'm highlighting, and I think you'll be in pretty good shape and we'll go for this ride. So now first the introduction. The introduction, I just want to mention 2 points, the timeline and space. That's the gist of the introduction. Timeline, we go back to 1972. Let's start from the beginning, at least what we know. It's the Stockholm Declaration on Human Environment. Note, human environment. 1988, you need no introduction, IPCC established. 1992 Real Earth Summit. I'm not going to bore you with this because we've all gone through this for the past few days. We see a hiccup in the Kyoto Protocol. US failed to ratify. Then we've got the Millennium Development Goals with a focus on developing countries, not developed. And then we have Sustainable Development Goals. Hey, the game has changed. It's all countries, developed or developing. Then we have the 2012 Real Earth Summit, 20 years on. Momentous occasion, 3 developments. We've got a Paris Agreement, COP15, which we'll constantly refer to because that's really the genesis of what we're looking at. Now, climate change is not mentioned in the MDGs. It's mentioned in SDGs many times. Now, I want to move forward to the space. It's so important. Before, what the space was the focus, parties, states, and politics. Now, it's politics again, geopolitics, and we have non-state entities coming in. We've seen that before here the past few days. In a way, it's wonderful that my session's towards the end because I think it's a good way to encapsulate it. You've got CSOs. Again, they're not monolithic, but you see them. You've got people, you've got individuals, you've got youth, advocates, activists. We've heard them all here in the past 2 days. We've got IPs mentioned by Jonathan, and the topic has moved from human environment, 1972, to now climate change, and it's more than that. It's everything. We're all lawyers. As we've been told, we're not just lawyers, we're actually climate change lawyers, right? As we've been so reminded. And it's gone from mountains, mentioned by Dr. Sharma, to the sea, islands, yeah? To nature as well. And the focus has really changed. 2023, polycrisis. No one and no country are spared. I hit that with a loud message. It actually comes from ODI. We can't go back to normal because normal was the problem. It may sound really earth-shattering, but it really isn't. Let's just get a grip on it and just move on. If we want to move on, we want to be resilient, we want to show qualities, want to show values, we need to do that. And now go to ethics. And in ethics, I cover 4 points. Common heritage of mankind versus common concern of humankind. Note the shift, mankind, humankind, the polytheist involved. So we have Law of the Sea, Antarctica, mankind. Now it's humankind, and it's being uttered in the COP quite a lot and in other media as well. And then I want to go to Laudato Si. Laudato Si is praise be to you by the Pope. It takes beyond that. It's 184 pages, fantastic reading, more than reading, to be really nourished, to be really digested, to see what it is. And it's not just religious in that sense. It crosses boundaries, yeah? It's religious and secular. It's a great combination. I would really recommend it to be read. I read it and I really enjoyed it. In a way, this climate change topic has really shattered me to know, wow, I'm really learning. And you know, the answer is, we are all learning, at least I am. It's universal, it's applicable to everyone. I cite the paras because you can have a look at it if you want. Climate is a common good, belonging to all and meant for all. These are the words of the Pope. He talks of ecological debt, integral ecology, use of fossil fuels, which will just send a lot of messages, civil society, education in environmental responsibility, ecological education. As I say, it's beyond a religious remit. He makes this point on compliance, which I cannot but help putting it on the board. The Earth Summit, its accords have been poorly implemented due to the lack of suitable mechanisms for oversight, periodic review, and penalties in cases of non-compliance. You know, it's enthralling to see someone making that statement. This is a statement of non-compliance or what should be complied with. And I think it's really food for thought. In 2022, we have the COP27, and I really like to highlight the acknowledgement of engagement of non-party stakeholders in climate action, and the recognition of the growing role of IPs, local communities, cities, and civil society, including youth and children. I know we've got a young boy with us. I think it's just fantastic. His voice needs to be heard. We had sessions with youth, and I really treasure that. We have the young students of today. Again, they're to be treasured because they're the leaders of tomorrow. And then I bring forward to Ethics in Action Initiative. It assesses the degree of consensus across religions and secular traditions to help states and people achieve SDGs and climate change. I want to highlight now the examples, yeah? The examples are to end poverty, for businesses to support the common good. We've heard Carla Hershey mention that before in the donut economics. For education, for climate justice, we've heard so much about climate justice, equity, inclusion, support IPs from discrimination and injustice, to combat corruption. That's so important. I don't need to introduce you to TI, Transparency International, but I will because it deserves a place here. What else would you consider as ethics? I now go forward to compliance. In compliance, I have 4 threads. Golden thread in the COP15, and then I move forward to compliance in terms of purpose and methodology. Then I talk of shall and should. It's a fun game for us lawyers. Shall, should, mandatory, not mandatory, permissive, and then the traction in 2022 COP27 and the values that are being achieved. So here the golden thread is, as you can see, it's all aspirational, voluntarist. Goal is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees, preferably to 1.5 compared to pre-industrial level. That's taken from Article 2. And to achieve this long-term temperature goal, countries aim. It's aiming, not you have to, you aim. And as soon as possible to achieve a climate neutral world by mid-century, as soon as possible. Notice the aspirational, the words that are being used, hopeful language. Teeth is missing. Teeth are missing. It hasn't got the crunch, the bite, yeah? And I think that's what will come because it's so voluntarist. Now, And it takes form in the 2022 COP, where again you have the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan that says resolves to pursue further efforts. Yeah, that kind of language. So how do you get compliance out of this? But maybe we should really look at, because the values are different here, is professionalism, whereas in the first one on ethics, it's the goodness, the compassion that really comes to fore. So in short, I would say not enough has been done. Of course, it's escalated further with COVID-19 pandemic and Russian invasion of Ukraine. And again, if you see the COP22, it's kind of interesting. There's talk of alignment by the UNFCCC, otherwise I'll call it CCC, the Executive Secretary, aligning every corner of human activity. Paris gives us the agreement, Katowice and Glasgow the plan, and Sharm el-Sheikh shifts to implementation. But what is it we're going to do that you can actually say there's compliance or not? Now, again, it's interesting because you have here the IPCC report by Nicholas Stern, and it was kind of interesting that in 2006, he had that report as well, Nicholas Stern, and he said there's still time to avoid worse impacts of climate change if we take strong action now. That was in 2006. This was in 2022. Not much has been done. And it's interesting that that report highlights non-compliance, and it's out in red, failure to deliver the climate finance commitment of $100 billion per year by 2020 by developed countries, as successive COPs has eroded trust. What about the non-compliance aspect, the penalty? But be that as way, now we're in implementation. So what are we implementing if there was a non-compliance before? And then the very chilling statement, the $100 billion commitment will only be met in 2023, 3 years past the target date. And that is only possible because of the increased financing from MDBs. So if you look at the next point, it actually mentions here that you have the financing by MDBs exceeded their 2025 climate finance goals. So that's a bit of a hooray, right? But all is not fine on the Western or Eastern front. So in compliance is really what you need to have is a regulatory framework, policy, rules, regulations, and then you need to see the purpose of compliance. What's the purpose of compliance? To promote good governance, to enhance effectiveness, to remedy harm suffered, and we can talk of the loss and damage provision later on, which I'll do shortly, and to improve outcomes. Methodology is not just compliance if you want to take a strict textual approach. Sometimes it's better to actually see from a problem-solving approach, because that's also complementary, yeah? Sometimes things are done, but how do you want to move on? And sometimes it helps moving on if you have a problem-solving or advisory approach. Now, the bit that I want to touch on is the shall and should. I guess as lawyers, we can have fun with it, like Alice in Wonderland. So you can have Article 4.4, should. Article 4.2, shall. So, like should means, do you have to do it? Is it mandatory? You can take your cake on it, depending on, as a good lawyer, which side you're on. And then shall communicate NDC and be in form of global stockade. Has it worked? I think it's very mixed in my view. And then you had, of course, the pandemic that created a furor in terms of how it has moved forward. And then now you have Climate Watch data. It's managed by WRI. And now I go to transparency. Yeah, I go to here, the Bridgetown Initiative, where it has been lingering on since way before 1991, with one or two making a case, and although it was raised at the COP, not at 15, it hadn't moved on, but now there's some traction in terms of the provision for loss and damage provision. Yet, however, it is still going to come up in COP 28 because the transitional committee was set up, and recommendations on how to operationalize both the new funding arrangements and the fund will be hopefully established then. I then now move forward to transparency. In transparency, I think it's really important to look at the provisions here to see this, the points I want to make. The litmus test is the global stockade, and then you have 2 points that I want to raise here is make my money matter and individuals. So in transparency, I want to highlight the 3 Ps: promoting accountability and providing information, transparency in the business or governance context, applying best practices, and the procedure of no conflict of interest. So on the bit about Make My Money Matter campaign, this is just a fantastic case of transparency where you have actors coming on board to say, look, why is there so much fossil fuel production? And they highlight high street banks in the UK. And then you have HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, being highlighted. And then you have the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero Alliance, where HSBC is a member, saying it will reduce it. And then you have individuals, and on individuals, I want to give my kudos to people, the young ones, Greta Thunberg, who needs no introduction. You're never too small to make a difference. We've heard them so much before, even from our earlier sessions. Nakate, will you hear us? We heard earlier on at the beginning, I think it was day 1, will you hear us please? The video presentation we had. And from Nakate, we heard, what haven't we communicated enough? Voices need to be heard. And on the second part I want to reinforce is the COP28. You've got a presiding the summit. That person is the CEO of the oil company, at the same time is the climate and war. Is there a conflict of interest? You take your guess. It can split both ways. I want now to move to the final slide. Moving forward, possible directions, active discussions and debates, no legal decisions, otherwise they might help us. ICJ contentious proceedings have not come forward, but advisory may come forward, and they're not binding, they're just persuasive, influential. One extreme view, voluntarist governance models, which I agree with. We can actually have an overhaul of the system, start off with a new international climate agency. Why? A soft law approach has been taken. It's all about recommendations or guidelines. We need more teeth. And then more space is needed. I've accentuated that before. More baby steps. When I say baby, I don't mean baby, but accumulatively, it'd be a lot. Even, for example, reducing cow burps. We can take corrective action ourselves, yeah? Starting from our own home, switching to LEDs, eating less meat and dairy, changes in World Bank reform, again, because MDBs have a large role to play, a crucial role, and evolution mapped by the World Bank, that's really causing a lot of concern. And finally, our own ethics, integrity, and compliance will help fight a long way in addressing climate change. On this note, I thank you.